Thanks for joining us, guys. Appreciate it. Awesome. Wow. So a few of you here already. So really what I wanted to do today is really I just wanted to discuss with you kind of I've been sharing over my posts and those sort of things as far as a workshop that we're developing. And what I wanted to do is kind of give you kind of a taste of that workshop and just all the content that we really want to share with this stuff. So hi guys, really appreciate it. One thing that I would say is that there's so much content I want to cover with you guys and give you lots of free sort of pro tips that the professionals are using at a high level. Name the industry from like illustration to graphic novels, comic books, storyboarding, all sorts of stuff. And so I want to kind of catch a large scope of just all the different areas. So first off, your questions and those sort of things that you have, keep your questions coming. Type them in the comments below. There'll be a huge help because what we'll do later on is we'll go ahead and add those comments, and we'll do a video on midweek this week to add in those discussion points, and I'll try to address those at that time. So the first thing that we want to do is I really want to discuss sort of the mysteries of how to go about drawing the human form and how we would go about doing that. And today you'll see some references in terms of using nude models and those sort of things. We certainly want to be respectful of the human form and human body and all that sort of stuff. So just be aware there will be nude references. But also at the same time, it's important that we understand and learn from the human form, so we have a better idea of when we go about drawing it. We want to have a better idea of just how do we not get stuck on all the things that sort of we've gotten used to as far as knowing the difference between our own opinion and imagination versus learning from our own our own experiences versus learning from knowledge and actual reality of how the figure is drawn and how we go about doing that. So those are kind of the tools and things that we want to go over today. And, just a little brief description. I've taught at the university level for a few years and had an amazing experience of that. And really what I do see is that I've now left the teaching as a professor and that sort of thing. And I really just saw as a professor that you had really two groups. You had one group that was there to learn, and then you had another group that was truly there just to check off a box of getting through whatever class that was. And you can't have a learning experience in that environment. It doesn't help anybody whatsoever. And so I really see now more than any other time, such as having an experience like this right here, right now, that we can have, our classroom is far larger and far bigger than just sort of the rote experience of an academic area that the professor may or may not care about the work that you're producing, the work you're developing. So I moved away from as being a professor and moved to this realm because I see a much more active approach in terms of who we can reach out and help and grow your guys' artwork to incredible levels. And then really that's kind of my overall motive. But so one of the things I talked about this week is a little bit about, in terms of when you go about drawing the human form and that sort of thing, I think I talked about understanding results, understanding when you're drawing in the moment, you're there with whatever model, or you're there with whatever whatever your reference might be, you're there with that person, and basically you're seeking out, your main motive or your main goal is seeking out sort of the humanity. I think I also talked about this week about lies, how I just referred to it, that we tend to, when we go about drawing, we tend to lie to ourselves and not approach the drawing after a sense of knowledge and a sense of actual evidence of how you go about receiving and developing this information. So, and yeah, please send your comments and all those sort of things. We're documenting them because, like I said, later on this week we'll write out a Q&A video. So really appreciate your guys' love and all that sort of stuff. The other thing is having a proper mindset when we go about drawing. How do we do that? What does that proper mindset look like? And the last thing I think I talked about was fear, in that when we encounter new things or new experiences, or in this case when we encounter a drawing or drawing the human figure, a lot of times fear can take over and we lose sort of the initiative or the incentive to dive in, and we really lose we have the wrong motive in terms of how we go about our work. So I talked about those things, and I would really encourage you guys to check out those videos to help give a little bit of insights before we even dive into actual drawing and the how-tos of drawing and all that sort of stuff. These are sort of the important things. So, one of my major goals, kind of a list of my major goals, is to make sure that your work is getting to an incredible level. In any class that I've ever taught, I don't know if you've ever been in a class where you've taken it from a teacher, and the teacher at the end of that semester maybe, that teacher has given you a lot of interesting information, but you look back at your semester's work and it looks exactly like that one professor's work. And then you look at all the other students in that classroom, or all the other students that individual professor or teacher or mentor is, everybody in that class is producing the same exact work. It's pointless. And so, my goal in any of the classes I have ever taught, it's always been about helping each individual sort of discover their superpower. We have unique abilities in this case in drawing that make us who we are and who we in terms of who we can be and those sort of things. And really one of the things I absolutely love doing in terms of teaching is really pulling out the individual in terms of what are their individual needs and what are their individual goals and desires, to be able for them to reach levels that they didn't think they would be able to be at that, at the beginning of the course. And so I definitely take the mindset of keep pushing and pushing and pushing until we do find sort of your superpowers and the whys and all those sort of things. Because the easiest question necessarily probably to answer in all this whole discussion is sort of the how of how we go about doing the artwork, and here's the tools that the pros are using, but really it's the discovery of the why and the discovery of your superpower that more than anything will help out that process. So that's definitely one of my major goals. And in sort of the case of drawing the human figure, it's sort of an idea that you have to balance that, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but you have to balance that with foundation in knowledge and versus opinion, and being able to balance the two out so that your drawing has your signature on it, along with the drawing also has kind of it's based upon the foundation of knowledge. So another aspect, the thing that I wanted to talk about is I mentioned the why, but the last one is, I think I made a post earlier this week. I think it was like of a mountain. And, when we look at sort of maybe your heroes or your influencers of who's helping you do your artwork, in terms of, whose artwork are you looking at, we look at the top of the mountain and we see the very top, and you're like, holy crap, how do we even get there? And the most important thing before we even talk about how you get to that point is that you have to know sort of, you have to have sort of a list of heroes of who do you like. For example, Enrique Marini is one for me, or Dyke Ruan is one for me. Federici is another. So anyway, point is you have several artists that you're looking at, And those sort of things will really help develop your opinion, along with that foundation in a base of knowledge. And those sort of two things will help combine to, again, and just doing those things alone will help out tremendously in improving your artwork and developing your artwork. So what I want to do is I want to do a little bit of a demo right now. And again, type in your questions, type in your thoughts, all that sort of stuff. Really appreciated. Because again, my main motive is that to help you guys grow and develop, and I definitely want this video to help capture that idea. So keep that information coming. So like I said, we'll be using nude references. You can go to, and as far as nude references, the best is to really work from life. And even though traditionally I'm more of a comic book person, that's definitely my mode. But like I said earlier, this relates to, it relates to illustration, it relates to storyboarding, animation. All these concepts relate to, what else? Certainly fine art. And so they relate to several parts or several things throughout the industry that are really quite important. And having a foundation in the human figure will truly, out of anything that you do, will set you apart from the masses. And so having an excellent grasp on how to go about drawing the human figure is absolutely the most important. And so, observing from life is really key here. And so even though, you might look at the greats, like, for example, I don't know, Jim Lee or something like that, even someone like him, he's still referencing, even though he's looking at sort of his heroes, which I mentioned earlier, he's still looking at artists, but he's also looking at real life. He's also observing real life. And you can't make any kind of comic book illustration, design, or any of those sort of things without having that base of knowledge, that information based upon the knowledge. And so that's really the key. And so it's almost as if, in a lot of ways, you're observing from a very scientific perspective. You're after results. You're not after perfection and sort of having the perfect drawing done right the first time. You're after the results, and those results will help educate your drawing, and that's where you really start seeing the massive amounts of improvement. So like I mentioned, you can get your references practically from anywhere. There's a number of places online. I'll just mention one, posespace.com. That's a good one. Like I said, there's a number of sources out there. If you want, you're more than welcome to get some sort of, if you can, you get like an actual reference of someone to model for you, and or get a group together to get, pay for an actual nude model to help out. And the reason why you do a nude model is that you have to understand what's under the figure, and to be able to understand sort of how the clothes are going to wrap around the figure, where the where the compression points are and where the stretch points are. And you can't have that understanding of being able to draw the clothes and the fabrics and all that sort of thing correct unless you have sort of the human figure or what's underneath it. And so that's the reason why we draw with nude figures. So what we're going to do is I'm going to change my camera view here and just kind of give you do a little bit of a demo and give you some ideas of how we want to go about and think about drawing the human form and all that. So stick with me for a second and let me adjust my camera here. And like I said, if you're needing to take off for this things, or maybe I haven't mentioned it quite yet, and hopefully, yeah, that looks pretty good. So, if you can't watch this entire video as its whole, no big deal, because we will be saving this and then posting it. And like I said, keep your questions going. So, let's see here. And like I said, keep your questions going, because I I guess in Wednesday or thereabouts, we'll post a kind of a Q&A sort of a thing. So the first thing that we really want to talk about is having a sharp pencil. Big fan of having a sharp pencil. So really a few things that I see a lot of intro artists or artists that are, maybe they're doing quality work, but they're not quite putting it all together. And one more thing that I forgot to mention, aside from your sources. As far as pose space, I'll just... I think that's how you spell it. Hopefully you can see that on the... Yeah. So pose space. And that's where you can get a lot of these references. But, you go to your local art gallery or that sort of thing. I have you can see here sort of a sculptor perspective of it. These are great references to going to your local art store, or your local art gallery, rather. But as far as the first thing that we want to start off with is line. And one thing is, you'll see kind of a few different techniques here. One is holding the pencil in this sort of manner. So first thing is line, and there are really three types. So with this type of line, we know that there's a definite direction to that line. Okay, so that line definitely has a direction. The second type of line that you might see is sort of this, another technique that you might see several people use. The problem with this sort of line is that it has several directions at the same time. And so it's hard to discern which direction you want the viewer's eye to go. And then the third type of line that you might see, and I see this a lot of times with beginners, is that when you're going about it, you have sort of this, you'll see sort of a hairy look to it. And so the hairy look, with that, you just have lots of these start, stop, start, stop, start, stop, start, stop. And then I also mentioned earlier that it's not necessarily when you're putting together your line, it's sort of a thing where even though you're like, I can't do it right the first time, that's no big deal, because you'll see here one thing that I'm doing is I might be feeling it out before I get to that, and I feel confident enough to make that stroke, and then by that point you have your line direction, and it feels fairly confident. And it doesn't matter as far as what the curve is either. Whatever line, now with the figure, you want to keep in mind sort of the direction that it's going in terms of creating an emphasis and those sort of things. And again, that can only come from the experience of having results. So the first thing is line, and these are the types of line that you want to be looking for in order to create energy and movement and direction. So another part of that is that, you certainly want to start soft. Start gentle. Don't worry about that. You can use a pen, pencil. It really doesn't matter the tool that you're using. I just like this Mars black. And then I'm using newsprint. Newsprint works fairly well because it's cheap, it's easy, it's easily accessible, those sort of things. So that's why I like newsprint. But if you have printer, it doesn't have to be extraordinary, really nice paper that you're going to spend $10 per sheet type of thing. You really want to some sort of paper that you can spend a lot of, because it's not the sort of the quality, it's the quantity of paper that you're going to end up using to be able to, all the drawings on that paper that you're going to end up using. So hopefully that makes sense, but it's the quality of the line. So this is the type of line that we're looking for. And there are a number of ways of practicing that, with your curves. And when you're practicing your ellipses, you'll feel there's an area where you're more natural to add more of an emphasis, and the emphasis is where you can really create sort of your own and developing your own opinion. Let's see what else here. Now, one thing in terms of how I was taught is, I was taught sort of the idea where you mark out your your 2 lines, and then you divide it in half, and then you divide that in half, and then you divide that in half, and then from there you roughly get sort of the human head. There's roughly where the nose is. You get sort of the idea of that. And then if you divide it in half and divide it in half again, that's about roughly where the chest begins, and it's sort of this shape that this type of technique of getting it, doing all these sort of measurement stuff, it works to a degree, and it can help you sort of understand where, there's the hip bone, and in terms of where it gives you kind of an idea of the anatomy of where the rib cage rests and where your hip bone is, and it gives you kind of an idea where the legs are, and the legs are halfway. This is nice, but there's a problem with this sort of technique. A lot of times when I see students or other artists, I can tell whether they're using some sort of technique built upon this foundation versus something that is more built upon sort of a C or S. And what a C or S is, this is kind of cool, is that, being able to measure all those sort of things out, it's not, anatomy is something that doesn't come first. You don't want to go and use anatomy first as sort of your basis for your knowledge. It's your observation. You really need to think about it in terms of back to a scientist. You're observing, you're being in the moment, not prejudging whatever line quality or all this sort of stuff. You're not worried about those sort of things. You're worried about the sort of the results. And so by going this route, you're going to end up with really rigid sort of descriptions in your artwork, and it will be much more difficult to take this sort of formula and translate it into something up here. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Again, drop me your questions, all those sort of things. And sorry, I'll get it back in frame. Thanks for letting me know. Let me know if that's better. A little bit better. Good? Okay. So drop a thumbs up if that makes sense, all that sort of stuff. Let's see here. So back to the C or S. So really what you're after is, and this is one really good exercise. So here's kind of a secret that you might see Disney or some of your other major studios doing in terms of how they have their artists go about making human forms and those sort of things. So I'm going to start with a new piece of paper so you can see that idea. All right. So really what they do is I don't know if you may have heard it in a number of different ways, but one being sort of a pillow people or bean people or sacks of flour. And so it's a really good exercise for you to have. And the exercise would be simply by taking kind of the idea where we have a pillow okay? And you're going to give that pillow some sort of personality that it has. And so the personality, you can make sad ones. And so if an exercise for yourself, make a happy pillow, like it's really excited or it's jumping for joy type of thing. And so it's as if maybe he's clicking his heels type of thing. So add an emotion to it will be something that will really help your work. And these are real rough, but again, you're just putting down ideas. These don't have to be, and kind of the way that I like working is I'll put a lot of these different scribbles down until I start developing a sound idea. And so it's not going to be something that you're going to discover on the first go here. I'm going to sharpen my pencil again. Oh, sorry guys. All right, so in this sort of case, so bean people, flour, sacks of flour, there's any number of ways in terms of adding sort of personality to that figure. And doing it to an inanimate object can be something that helps take sort of a little bit of that mystery out. In other words, you're working with something that doesn't have, all these, we almost, in a lot of ways, when we go about drawing the human figure, we get self-conscious, like we're almost describing ourselves, even though we're drawing, in this case, a figure over here. You can see that. So it's something that, again, taking out that fear that you're just after the results. That's the only thing that you're after in terms of educating you how to go about this information. So start off with, I'm just going to give you kind of an idea that to give you kind of that base. So when you're drawing and you go to an art gallery, that sort of thing, you're going to slowly figure it out. And one thing is to draw fairly small too, and that can be helpful in terms of you understanding what exactly you're experiencing, and slowly kind of gathering that information. Now there's tons of different ways that you can do this. Like you've probably heard of, well, if I draw it real fast, then I'll be better. Again, go at whatever speed you are. Obviously, there's different moments and times you want to challenge yourself. Some moments you'll want to be challenging yourself to push your work and how fast you go about doing it. Other times, it's just about the information. So you can see here with this, get roughly his torso here. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about in terms of being people, and this will help you educate you as far as what you're looking at here. Okay, so doing several of these over and over again will be really helpful in terms of giving you an idea, and you're not worried at this point. You're not even worried about, okay, how does the rib cage fit within here, and where does where's the hip bone sit? I mean, you're not even worried about these details because you're more concerned with the form and capturing the form in a very simple, manageable way. So I get back to my notes here. And I think that, like I mentioned, you're looking for that sort of a soft feel to it. Another aspect that we want to talk about, so I talked about the C or the S. This would be almost considered a C because you have sort of a C shape. And versus, you can take this either way. But you can see here, bring this down a little bit further, you can see over here you have this compression. And so for every C or S, we'll do an S here in a second, you'll have an opposite compression. The other thing is that you'll look at, and in the case of this model, it's kind of hard to see. Let me switch to a different model. We'll go to her later. Okay, so for a model like this, you can see, for example, if we're going to, let's get kind of her. Again, starting soft and then working into it. What's that shoulder on the back side that's... Okay. Now, in some ways, well, I'll go back to it in a second. So, this, for example, is just okay, we have that. And again, we have the C here with the compression. Okay, so if we look here, though, we have the shoulders kind of doing this motion here, and then we have the hips going a slightly different. Okay, and so this is kind of the idea where, that's kind of the next area that we're looking at too. But even with you can do just tons of different types of bean people. where maybe this is not the correct interpretation. Maybe it's some sort of backwards S. Right? Because you can see here with our information here, so her arm almost, her shoulder here at the top, and then it curves through. Okay? So that might be another way. So this would be an example of an S, but either way, you have kind of this idea where you have a compression here, and then you have the opposite here, and then it goes back and forth. And it almost goes back and forth to a point where you're doing this sort of give and take, and each line has its own relationship to the next line. And so that's how it's, make sure you can see that. So each line goes to the next line. It gives you kind of a way to go off of that. And so that's why, so those would be your two examples of an S type of curve off of the same type of model that we have here. Okay, so those would be the basics in terms of understanding the relationship between lines. And then also the greater the curve. And so maybe the next iteration of this particular model is maybe you have a more drastic curve to give her more of a, like she's leaning back more. And so this would be sort of the idea of adding more opinion to it. Okay? And then you can do overlapping lines and all that sort of good stuff to throw the idea out there as well. Okay? So hopefully that makes sense. Again, drop your questions, all that, and we'll go through those in our time here in about a few days. So the greater your curve here, the greater your compression. And so there might be several layers to this, ultimately. Okay? So hopefully that makes sense. Kind of the next thing, a part of this, and a part of this form, is that you have to start building. So, you have the torso, and you're kind of working off the torso, but you have to give it some sort of foundation to rest on. Otherwise, the human figure it necessarily won't make sense. Or than beans to pillows, okay, fine, but we need some sort of foundation that this can sit upon. And so really you're following almost the same pattern here. So in this case with her, I don't know if you can see it, with her back leg here, we curve in, and then there would be a kneecap here, and then we curve in again. So what that looks like, again, it's the relationship. Or in other words, you're looking for rhythm would be another word that can be used. And you're thinking more about line direction. Okay? So again, you're not after perfection here, you're just after results. That's all I'm after at this moment in time. I'm not even concerned about, okay, is my legs, holy crap, she has much longer legs. Maybe that's the type of character we're after. Or maybe that's the type of individual we're trying to design here. Generally speaking, kind of a rule of thumb, your characters that have longer legs are going to be more appealing to the eye. And so like measure out any of your Marvel or DC or whatever kind of your traditional, characters, they're going to have longer legs than they're going to have versus their body. So keep that in mind. And then, if you measured it out that way, their head would be absolutely gigantic. So this just gives you a little bit more room to have your own opinion in here. So, and let's just keep working on this foundation here. Now with this leg, it's a little bit different. Instead of sort of this rhythm that we have, sort of this here, here, and here, instead of something like this, we're going to have something a little bit differently. Now you can, if you want, a minimal amount of measuring is fine. but it's just to kind of give you a way to gauge. Okay. And then we have her leg. I made it. That's okay. That's why you start soft. Okay, so again, the only difference with this is that you have more of a here and here, but you do have it even with the foot here at the bottom, and then even with the toes down here. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense in terms of what we're seeing here. And this would be kind of building upon that foundation. Once you get sort of the foundation in, in terms of how to connect all this together, you have kind of a base. You have something there. You're also paying attention to that base will educate you in terms of how they're attached, or how how gravity rather is affecting their overall movement and expression. And so that will come with your foundation. Okay, so that makes sense? The next thing that you're going to be able to do is that, you start with the legs, you move to the one of the things I started when I very first started learning, I started just drawing it from the head. And a lot of times what would happen is my head would end up larger than my body, and then I have to go back and you start erasing and all this sort of stuff. What I definitely suggest now is starting more with the body and then going to this sort of mode where you're building on the foundation. And then, from the foundation, then you're going to add in two things. One is the head finally. Again, you're sort of doing this sort of type of lines. Right? That makes sense? You're always thinking about the relationship of one line connected to the next line. I'll draw an ear for reference, where our eyes are. So you're looking for those things, and you're just looking for generalities. Now with her arms, before you get to the arms, you're going to start with the head. Finish the head. The next thing that's going to basically clean this all up, because you want your how do I say this? You want your let's see here. I spell torso. So put torso or butt rather. Get me all over the place. So butt plus head, or butt head, is going to equal balance. Okay? So putting these two things is going to really balance this out, and we're really going to start feeling confident about our work here. So and we can just add general lines for that. We don't have to be all that descriptive about it at this point in time. Now with the arms, you're thinking in terms of the same exact thing. This sort of relationship here, pulls to here. Now with this sort of thing, your hands are an incredible expression in terms of who you are. And so maybe it would be better to have her arm or hand out like that. And so, you're almost making sort of a glorified stick figure in a lot of ways, but it's educating you in terms of how you would go about the next level. So one idea is that you could scan this in and then start building on that if you're used to drawing it on your pen tablet or any of those sort of things. And so again, you have this relationship here of the opposite shoulder and then the elbow right here. This gets a little bit more complicated, but one thing that you're looking for, if you look in any of these, you're looking for 45-degree angles. 45-degree angles are going to be far more appealing to the eye versus your rote sort of just straight up and down, left to right, all that. Okay, so your 45-degree angles are going to be much more exciting. Again, this angle here in the shoulder and the hips, not quite 45 obviously, but hopefully that gets you an idea. Okay, so we talked about, let's see where everything, the other thing that we probably could talk about is that, as you go through this, feel comfortable to add in landmarks, in terms of where the belly button might be or where the nipples might be and that sort of thing. And those landmarks can help you understand where all this information is fitting together. In this case, adding in her other butt cheek there. Okay? Okay, that makes sense. So adding in landmarks can be incredibly helpful, like the ear here and that. Okay, let's see what else we have here. So one thing I want to do right now is I want to just put this all together for you. Go back to this one. Is to just kind of give you an idea of what that would look like. And so you have the head and you have the torso rather, then you build upon that the foundation, and it just gives you kind of a way to, or a guide, and you're not busy worrying about all the perfect measurements. I just broke my web. Okay, so you're not worried about all the perfect measurements like with her. You're not worried about, okay, well, if I did that, cut it in half and all that sort of stuff. You're not even thinking about that, because in a lot of ways that's based upon, you sort of have this idea where if you have a scale, and over here you have opinion. And if you have opinion and your opinion is way too heavy, then your knowledge over here isn't going to be balanced out. And so really what your goal is, you're looking for a way to balance these two out as much as possible. So that foundation and knowledge is sitting over here, and then you have your opinion is sitting over here. And so the idea is to get them to balance out as much as possible. And with that, when you start doing that, that's really when you start seeing kind of your own signature of who you are and the way you write upon the world and how you go about your ideas. And so those are the things that are really going to guide your overall understanding of the information, which is here, in translating that into your own idea. But it has to be grounded upon kind of simple foundations that are chewable in a bite-sized manner that you can then take and later on add in your own exciting opinion and ideas and that. Okay, so that's kind of give you kind of an idea of it all just sort of being put together as I work through this. So let's see if I can. You can see here I'm not even drawing yet. I'm just trying to feel it out, trying to get an idea of what that is. And her shoulder I find kind of interesting here. It shows in this sort of picture you can see a lot of the sort of idea of attitude here. So, and that's kind of the thing you want to think about in terms of who are they, what are they representing, what are they doing, what would put them in this situation. Those are all kind of keys here. And this one would be more considered of an S curve. Okay, so you're not looking for, we're just trying to figure out what's going on here. So maybe another layer line. So that's kind of the torso there. So again, this sort of landmarks can be helpful. In terms of educating what's going on here. So we don't want to get too far in the landmarks quite yet, because we're still figuring out, because we have to build the foundation upon this to start off with. Okay? Okay, so here we are. We got the kind of the bean body here. We have built upon the foundation, and now we can start balancing that out with, again, a little bit more information upon landmarks, and so we can start making some of this information a little bit more sense. And you can see here with the how the neck is oriented here. You can see that on this one. There's sort of that. So I start off with this sort of, this S curve here that wraps around and wraps around her leg almost. You can kind of see that, and then the neck is experiencing that same sort of curve there too, going right along into that S curve. Again, this is a way in which to just really start just interpreting all the complexities that make up this particular individual. I'll add some here and there for a little bit of attitude. Okay, so that gives you kind of a base to work off of. And then with her arms, we might do some sort of, even though her hand looks like it's holding onto her hair, maybe for me it's a little bit interesting, like she's saying, what do you need? Why are you harassing me? Okay. And then the other arm, and then you might do some sort of thing like, hey, what's up? Okay, so this is kind of an idea of how you would all put this together in a real quick general way. So, in a lot of ways, in terms of when we start, maybe I should measure this out real quick. Yeah, so her legs are really quite long compared to her torso here. Maybe at this point you would start adding in more details. You could take it from here. There's a number of different techniques that you could do. You could scan it in. You could put a light table on this and then start building on it with another sheet of paper. There's a number of different ways of how this can translate to all sorts of different things and all sorts of different avenues, adding emphasis on this curve here to really add in kind of the idea of the weight and Okay, so hopefully this gives you kind of an idea. And the thing is that you have to, in terms of climbing the mountain, and sort of what I talked about earlier. You look at sort of my mountain up here. You have sort of your grades way up here at the top. I'll make this bigger so you can see that. So, got my funny mountain here. And then, sort of the greats have staked a flag up here, right at the very top. And, and for some of us, we start out here and we're looking all the way up here and you're like, holy crap, there's no way. And, this is kind of the foundations where you start. I mentioned knowing who your greats are. I mentioned kind of the idea of once you know that it can give you an incredible leg up in terms of being able to propel yourself to new levels in terms of how you go about your artwork and how you go about making your artwork. So what we'll be doing is that we'll post this video again for you guys so you can take a look at it and dive in the whole thing. And the thing is really appreciate you guys sticking with me and all the amazing support that you guys have given. All right, so you guys have done, I've been really appreciative just in terms of everyone sticking with and supporting the work. But here's the thing, and here's really my main goal and motive. It's really about supporting you guys and really about helping taking your guys' work to the next level. Hopefully by this point, you know my values in terms of watching this video, seeing my other videos. You know my values. You know what excites me, what I like, what I don't like. You know my goals. You also know, you've seen here some pretty amazing tools in terms of being able to quickly break down the human form in a very succinct way and be able to translate that into your own work. And in order to, if you're going up to like the mountain that I just showed, that if you're going up to that height, you're going to need, it's a team sport. It's something that you can't do on your own, and you're going to need help in order to keep sort of that movement going. So, especially if you're going from, if you want to be at sort of the top of where you are, and even if you just want to plainly just improve your work and get to that level of where you think your artwork should be, okay, sorry about that. So especially if you're going to want to achieve the level that you're after, or if you're going to be a part of the industry in some way in terms of drawing comics, in terms of illustrating, storyboarding, animating, all sorts of things, because this translates to each one of those areas. If you're going to need help, and more than likely some of you're already going the academic route, and you've gone that academic route, and it's somewhat improved your work, maybe not. And especially if you're going to need that help and you're already paying for it in a sense through maybe even school loans or those sort of things, it doesn't necessarily make sense to continue on that path. And if you already know my values and you already know that in terms of what I like and what I don't like, I'd really like to be the one to help you guys take your work to the next level. And so, I don't necessarily know what will happen in terms of if you go with someone else and that sort of thing. And I certainly don't know if they're going to care as much as I do about really improving your work and seeing your work go to the next level. So, if you're going to need help on an ongoing basis, I really believe that I'm the one to help you make you do that, or help you along do that. If you keep looking sort of the idea of sort of at the top of the mountain and like only if and that sort of thing, all that is left is sort of, we talked about it earlier in this video, is sort of if we know the how and we know the why, then all we have to do is to live it and experience it. And so a typical college class, I believe in the United States on average, is at $1,200, and that's not even counting the room and board and, all facilities and so on and so on and so on. What I'm going to do is we're offering a class on October 2nd. And the class will be going over the human figure, what we just discussed in this. The class will also be a one-day whole live workshop. It'll be starting from 9 a.m. to about 4:30 Central Daylight Time in here in the United States. And we'll be going over all that content that we just discussed. And the other cool thing is I'm putting that at $449 for that entire class. Now the cool thing is, if you go to the bio, if you go to my bio, you'll see a link there. That link will then take you to the information page, and then from there there's a join page, and from the join page you can reserve your seat. But some objections might be that Eli, I don't have the time and all that sort of stuff to meet with you on the day. I think you got some really cool content. Maybe this is really neat, but I don't have the time. What we'll be doing is we'll be saving all this content and we'll be putting it on a portal. And on this portal, you'll have full access. You'll have access to the workshop on the 2nd of October. Past that workshop, you'll have access to 12 weeks worth of exercises, demos that I'm going to be doing just for this group. And then you're also going to have access, I mentioned the recordings, the critiques. You'll have access to 3 critiques. And then let's say, for example, my schedule's too busy. I have kids, whatever. I have kids too, and it's incredibly busy. I get it. No, absolutely get it. So we'll leave that stuff up for a year is what we're going to do, so that you have access to it. And so maybe once a month what you do is that you set aside a little bit of time for yourself and work on these exercises that we're going to go over. And the other cool thing is, and why I'm so passionate about this, and I think this is the way in terms of how art education should be, in terms of your own comfort of your own studio, in terms of the comfort of instead of going to an academia sort of thing that may or may not be on board with you, and you may not think that it's Brent, one of my buddies, he just joined in this conversation. When I think about him, is that, and this happened to me too, is that the type of work we learned in college was not what is required in the industry. It just flat out isn't. And so I just want to shout out to, I don't want your work that looks like this year's work to look like your next year's work. It's ridiculous. One of my favorite comments or quotes is from Einstein, is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So here's the deal. You owe this to yourself to join this class by going to my bio. And now's the time to be able to do it. And so what I want you to do is go to my bio, fill out the order page, and then join the workshop and reserve your seat. There are only going to be a few seats for this class, and on top of it, I'm only keeping this website open for a limited time. And so I look for the opportunity to really share in your growth and development. I'm so excited about it. And then the last thing I just want to say is invite you to participate in this exercise, and look forward to magic happen. All the best, guys, and we'll check you later. Bye.